All right, ready to dive into Hebrews chapter 7, verses 1 through 28. We're going deep on this mysterious guy, Melchizedek.
Oh, yeah. Melchizedek, he just pops up in Genesis, blesses Abraham, and then disappears.
But then, in Hebrews, the writer goes all in on him, especially about what he means for understanding Jesus.
Yeah. They really make a big deal out of him.
So you've given me tons of great material to work with for today. Notes, timelines, even some study guides.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a lot here to unpack, so much to talk about, like who eyes this Melchizedek guy? What's the big deal?
Right. It's almost like a detective story trying to figure it all out.
Exactly. Let's start with the basics. Who is this guy?
Well, the first thing we see is he's introduced as King of Salem.
Okay, King of Salem.
And Priest of God Most High.
And Priest of God Most High. But Genesis doesn't tell us much else, does it?
No, not really. Genesis 14 is the only time he shows up in the entire Old Testament.
Okay, Genesis 14.
But it is a significant appearance. I mean, you have Abraham, the father of the Jewish faith, paying tithes to this Melchizedek.
Oh, wow. So that's a big deal.
It's huge.
Okay, so, I mean, paying tithes back then was pretty common, right? What makes this so special?
It was common. But think about it. Abraham is the one who got God's covenant promises. He's the patriarch.
Right, right.
And yet here he is giving a tenth of everything he's got to Melchizedek.
Huh. I never really thought about it like that before.
It implies like a ranking, that Melchizedek is actually in a higher position.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So then we get to the book of Hebrews, and things get even more mysterious. Hebrews 7.3 describes Melchizedek as without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. What's that all about? Sounds a bit like a superhero origin story.
Yeah, right. It definitely makes you stop and think.
So is the writer of Hebrews trying to say Melchizedek was some kind of, like, immortal being?
Most scholars say no. It's not meant to be taken literally.
Okay, so no secret society of immortal priests, then?
Probably not. It's more of a way to emphasize his mysteriousness.
Okay, mysteriousness.
His eternal nature. Like, he exists outside of time.
So it's more about making a theological point than giving us Melchizedek's actual family tree.
Right, exactly.
But why do that? What's the point of emphasizing his eternal nature?
Well, think about it. The author is setting up a contrast between Melchizedek and the Levitical priesthood.
Okay, with the Levitical priesthood.
Which was all about lineage and rules and all that.
Okay, the Levitical priesthood. I mean, that was a big deal in the Old Testament.
Huge. Established through Moses,
Mm-hmm.
passed down for generations. It was at the center of the entire sacrificial system in the Old Covenant.
Right, of course.
So you've got this Levitical priesthood, totally rooted in the Old Testament law.
Yeah, totally.
And then you have Melchizedek, who seems to operate outside of those boundaries, with a priesthood that's eternal. It's not tied to family lines or even death.
So are we talking about like two different types of priesthood here?
That's exactly it. And that's a key point here, because then the writer of Hebrews takes this comparison and makes about Jesus.
About Jesus.
Saying that he's a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, not according to the Levitical line.
Wow, so that's fascinating. I mean, under the Old Testament law, Jesus couldn't even be a priest, right? He was from the tribe of Judah, not Levi.
Exactly. His priesthood is something totally new, totally different.
And it all goes back to this mysterious Melchizedek.
It does. It's based on something much bigger, more permanent than earthly rules or family trees. Remember, Hebrews 7:16, it says Jesus' priesthood is based on the power of an endless life, like we talked about with Melchizedek.
Ah, so it's echoing that idea of like existing outside of time.
Right. It's pointing to something eternal.
I see. So Melchizedek is like this model, this foreshadowing of the kind of priesthood Jesus would establish.
Exactly.
A priesthood that goes beyond the limits of the old system.
You got it. And this has huge implications for how we understand faith, because as Hebrews goes on to say in verse 12, for when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well.
Hold on, wait. A change in the law? Whoa. So it's not just about a different high priest. It's a whole new way of relating to God.
That's what the writer of Hebrews is getting at. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. I can't wait to hear where this goes.
So we left off with that big idea from Hebrews, that when the priesthood changes from Levitical to Melchizedekian, it means the law itself has changed too.
Yeah, that's a pretty wild thought. So what does that mean exactly? Are we saying the Old Testament law just doesn't matter anymore?
Not exactly. It's not that the Old Testament is irrelevant now. It's more like Jesus fulfills it. Like he's the ultimate goal of everything the law pointed towards.
Okay, I think I get that. But can you help me understand this change in the law thing? What exactly is changing?
Think about the purpose of the Old Covenant law. It was about trying to bridge the gap between God and people through all these sacrifices and rituals.
Oh, okay. Trying to bridge the gap.
But the book of Hebrews is saying that system just couldn't get the job done.
You mean like the law was a good idea, but it just didn't work?
Yeah, kinda. Hebrews actually calls it weak and unprofitable. But it wasn't because God made a mistake. It's because people are inherently flawed.
Oh, I see. Like we're always messing things up.
Exactly. We can't earn our way into a right relationship with God, no matter how hard we try.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like trying to climb a mountain, but the mountain's too high. You just keep slipping back down.
That's a great analogy.
You start thinking maybe there's got to be a better way to get to the top.
Right. And that's kind of like what the Old Covenant law was like, with all the rules and rituals.
Yeah.
It was a standard that no one could actually reach.
So then Jesus comes along, and he changes everything.
Exactly. Jesus, as our high priest, after the order of Melchizedek, he brings in a new covenant, a better covenant.
Okay, a new covenant.
He bridges the gap between us and God, not with rules, but with his perfect sacrifice.
So instead of us trying to climb this impossible mountain, Jesus has already climbed it for us, and he's reaching down to pull us up.
I love that picture. That's the whole idea of the new covenant.
That's powerful.
We don't have to rely on our own efforts to reach God. We can just come to him with confidence because of what Jesus has already done.
That's amazing.
It is.
Okay, I see how this idea of the law changing connects to Jesus as our high priest, but can we go back to Melchizedek for a minute? I'm still a little fuzzy on how he fits into all of this.
Sure. So as we said before, Melchizedek is like a foreshadowing of Jesus's priesthood.
Okay.
He represents this idea of a priesthood that's not bound by earthly things like family lines or death. It's eternal.
So he's almost like a placeholder,
Yeah,
pointing forward to the perfect priesthood that Jesus would establish.
that's a good way to put it. And that's why the writer of Hebrews makes such a big contrast between Jesus and the Levitical priests.
What do you mean?
The Levitical priests, even though God ordained them, they were still just human. They had weaknesses. They sinned.
Right.
They had to keep offering sacrifices day after day, first for their own sins and then for the people's sins.
Yeah, it was like a never-ending cycle.
But Jesus, as our high priest, he's different.
Different how?
Completely different. Hebrews describes him as holy, harmless, undefiled, set apart from sinners.
Okay, set apart.
His sacrifice wasn't something he had to keep doing over and over. It was a one-time thing. It was an act of love that completely atoned for our sin.
So with Jesus, it's not about external rules or rituals anymore. It's about the power of his life and the perfect sacrifice he made for us.
Exactly. And that's where the real power lies. This new covenant priesthood gives us something the old system could never give us.
And what's that?
Complete freedom. Lasting freedom from the burden of sin.
Man, this is heavy stuff. But, if we're not under the Old Testament law anymore, what are we supposed to do now? Like, what guides our lives?
Yes. That's the big question, isn't it? And the writer of Hebrews tackles that head on. But we'll need to dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, you're killing me with these cliffhangers. I'm ready. Let's get to it. All right, so we're back. And I'm still thinking about that question we left off with. If we're not under the Old Testament law anymore, what guides us now as Christians?
Well, that's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? And, the book of Hebrews really wrestles with this whole transition from the old covenant to the new.
So what's the answer? What does it mean for us?
Hebrews makes it pretty clear it's not about a new set of rules, this new covenant.
Okay, not new rules.
It's about a changed heart.
A changed heart.
It's about a relationship with God that's not based on what we do, but on his grace.
Okay, grace, not rules. But I got to say, that still sounds kind of, I don't know, theoretical. What does that actually look like in everyday life?
Think about it this way. Under the old covenant, people constantly had to offer sacrifices.
Right.
To atone for their sins.
Yeah, it was like they were always trying to make up for messing up.
It was a never-ending cycle of trying to earn God's favor. But in the new covenant, Jesus offered the perfect sacrifice once for all time.
So are you saying we don't have to constantly strive to be good enough anymore?
Exactly. That constant striving, it's over. The burden's been lifted. We don't have to earn our salvation. That's the amazing freedom we have in Jesus.
That's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It is.
But, okay, let's say we're not following rules. How do we know what's right and wrong? How do we live in a way that pleases God?
That's where the Holy Spirit comes in.
Oh, okay. The Holy Spirit.
Remember the new covenant.
Yeah.
It's not just about forgiveness, it's about being transformed, changed from the inside out.
Yeah.
When we accept Jesus, God's Spirit actually comes to live within us.
So it's like he's with us all the time, guiding us.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
He helps us understand God's will, gives us strength to resist temptation, and leads us to live lives that reflect God's character.
Okay, so it's not about checking off a list of rules anymore.
Right.
It's about letting God's Spirit work in us, changing us from the inside out, so that we naturally do what's right.
You got it. It's about becoming more and more like Jesus. And it's not a journey we take alone. We have each other, the church, to support us, help us grow.
So instead of obsessing over what we're not supposed to do, we focus on becoming more like Jesus, letting his Spirit shape our thoughts and our actions.
Exactly. And it's all made possible because of Jesus and his role as our high priest. Remember, he's constantly interceding for us, going before God on our behalf.
Wow. It's like having the best lawyer in the universe, arguing our case before the ultimate judge.
And the best part, he never loses.
I like those odds.
Because of his sacrifice and his ongoing intercession, we can be totally sure of our salvation. We're free from condemnation, and we're free to live lives of love and service.
Wow. This has been, I don't know, a really powerful deep dive.
It's pretty profound stuff.
I feel like I'm starting to grasp the whole Melchizedek thing and what it reveals about Jesus as our high priest.
It really changes how we think about faith, doesn't it?
It's not about striving or earning our way. It's about receiving God's grace, this incredible, undeserved gift he's given us.
And you know what? Embracing that grace, it changes everything.
It really does. It sets us free to live lives full of purpose and joy, knowing we're completely loved and accepted, not because of anything we've done, but because of what Jesus has already done for us.
And that is the good news of the gospel.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's the perfect place to wrap up our deep dive. Thanks for taking this journey with me.
It's been my pleasure. And for everyone listening, don't stop here. Keep digging into the scriptures, keep asking questions, and let God's Spirit guide you into all truth. That's where the real adventure begins.